Welcome to Annotations, an Unruhe Media podcast on art, politics, and life itself. My name is Nico Heller. In the crucible of Northern Ireland's complex cultural landscape, life art has, over the past 50 years, emerged as a powerful medium of engagement, critique, and healing. This dialogue examines the growth of artist-led initiatives that have shaped the landscape of contemporary performance art in Northern Ireland and beyond. We talk about the challenges and transformative impact of sustaining a live art practice over time, the importance of cross-border and international collaborations, and the strategies employed to engage wider audiences. Joining me for this dialogue is Brian Patterson, who is currently researching the history of performance art in Ireland at the Belfast School of Art. He's also a veteran performance artist and co-founder of Bbeyond, which for the past 20 years has played a key role in promoting and evolving live art both in Northern Ireland and internationally. His dual perspective as artist and promoter offers unique insights into the practicalities of nurturing ephemeral forms of art outside of the cultural mainstream. Through our conversation, we explore Bbeyond's impact from its monthly performance meetings to global projects, and consider how such initiatives have the power to shape not only the future of performance art, but also the broader cultural landscape in an ever-changing world. I can see that Brian has already arrived, so do let me invite him in.
First,
Brian, I'm glad you're here. Thank you very much for joining me. Okay, so let's go straight in. Brian, I've already made a brief introduction, and I'm so glad you're here. There's tons of stuff we want to go through. So let's start at the very beginning. I mean, you've been around for a very long time. In fact, actually, just for the benefit of our viewers, you and I did our masters together in Belfast back in 1991, 92. And you went on from there, from strength to strength. So let's talk a little bit about the 1990s. What was the performance art scene like back in the 1990s, and what were the sort of the key spaces, the main initiatives that were sort of kind of keeping performance art moving forward?
Well, the key one for me was the real key one for me was the very first time I saw performance art was in 1991, and was between doing the BA and the MA. So I was coming from painting, and then the next thing I see this kind of performance stuff, I was going, oh my God, what is this? Like, this is really sort of like outside the pale, like, So I kind of, I when I went to do the MA, like, that was a year-long thing. I couldn't do performance then. I mean, I was totally fascinated by it, but I couldn't do it because, I just thought, oh, that's too much. Like, for me, I was kind of too, what would I say about myself? Like, I mentally constipated. I was basically too shy, too whatever you want to call it. Like, I was like self-conscious or whatever. So my way into it then was basically through making installations, and that was a kind of to kind of go away from painting to kind of go into installations. And you walked into it, and and then it was only sometime after that then I kind of realized that was like I've made some installations, thought, oh, some of them work and some of them don't, like, kind of there. But I remember thinking about it one day, and I was saying, what, there's something missing here. I just can't put my finger on it. And this wee voice said to me, my consciousness, it's you, matey. And oh God, no, like, I can't do this. So that was but it was that realization, knowing that it was a big thing for me, like, and then, but it took me, still a good while then to kind of, step into it. So from doing what you talked about, the MA, because it was actually set up by, the other organization that was set up in Belfast at the time was Catalyst Arts, like, and they're still going, and that was set up by our cohort, our students, like, from the same year, like, Karen Vaughan, Dervla, Sandra Johnson, who's actually my supervisor now at the moment, like, So, it's a small world, but
it is indeed. I mean, performance has a long history, well, a longish history in Normal. It goes, actually, obviously, you know this better than me, it goes back beyond the 1990s. Joseph Beuys, for example, sort of, paid a visit to Northern Ireland, and it sparked like some stuff. So there is a sort of a kind of an on and off kind of thing. And then, of course, I believe in the 1970s, Alistair McLennan sort of relocated to Northern Ireland and became quite a central figure in the kind of the performance art scene. By the 1990s, some of that had settled, some of that had sort of like fallen asleep, died off. It was a sort of funny, a strange kind of in-between period, wasn't it, for the performance arts? But of course, there was stuff going on. I mean, Alistair was doing stuff, and who else was doing stuff back in the 1990s?
Oh, well, well, there was kind of Alistair, and then in the kind of in that late 70s going into the 80s, there was like Andre State, there was John Carson, there was Nick Stewart, Brian Connolly, the people like that, Anne Seagrave, so those people were kind of doing it then. And then, kind of before, what actually was interesting about it, because you just mentioned Boyce, in the sense that, he was instrumental, and this year is the 50th anniversary of him, this November coming is the 50th anniversary of him being here. And they're doing something in the museum this year about it, because they have his blackboards, and he came here and he gave a talk, but he also gave 2 talks down in the art college as well. So he was kind of very, provocative. And what he actually sort of changed was that, in a sense, that a lot of people went over to the Documenta on the strength of that, one of those Documentas, Documenta 6 it was, and there was a lot of kind of conversation going on there, and a 100-day workshop and all this kind of stuff, and they kind of came back. And then they set up Circa magazine and ARE, and that's what the organization that was set up before, what he called that project I was talking about, available resources, was called ARE, and they ran for 10 years from 1978 or whatever to 1988. Yeah.
Okay, but sort of back to the 1990s. I mean, in a way that there was good people doing performance art back then as well, but they didn't really have a home. They didn't really have a sort of a kind of a shared place, like an organization. What kind of triggered, or what was the sort of what made you think about sort of setting up like an organization like Bbeyond? What was the kind of the catalyst for that?
Well, literally, the catalyst was Catalyst, Catalyst Arts, because after I came out of Catalyst Arts, I served my time there from 1990, well, the end of 1995 to 1998, there. And, so everybody would serve 2 years. And so it was the kind of the ex-MA students and students from the college would kind of, and that's still going, which is a kind of, it's going voluntary, there, which is a kind of, says something about that, and so those 2 projects, or that project I said about available resources, and then they did another one then called Exchange Resources. And after that, then Catalyst started doing stuff. Then from 1996, they made this festival, a fixed festival, and they basically has a performance event every 2 years. So there was 1998, and then onwards, and it's still running to present, So, but I was kind of thinking that there needs to be a bit more performance, rather than every 2 years, this kind of gesture to it. So, and that's basically what was behind, in this. So I was talking to Alistair and Brian Connolly and Rainer Pagel, that there. So that's what kind of really, got started thinking about, what to do,
Okay, so but there must have been a kind of a point at which you and your fellow conspirators decided, okay, we're not going to do Bbeyond. Well, how did that come about, and how did that actually sort of kick into action?
Yeah, actually, it was actually a meeting by Arthur Tiber, a Polish artist, came over, 1999, I think it was, 1999, and basically what he called he had a talk, in Catalyst. And I couldn't go to that talk that day because I had all these Spanish artists coming, because my partner at the time, Ruth, was still involved in Catalyst. So we were making a meal for all these Spanish artists, so we took them down to the pub afterwards. But so there was, Arthur Tiber come over, and he was looking for kind of, more kind of interactions between kind of Northern Ireland and Poland, so basically nothing really sort of nothing really came of that meeting. Now, I was talking to kind of Magusha afterwards one time. I remember I met her in the Omer Bath Gallery and said to her, and she was, we were talking about it, and she was really disappointed that nothing kind of came of it. So, and I said, do you want to do something about it? And she says, yes. And so that's basically, we thought we come up with an idea to do some kind of Polish exchange. And we weren't thinking about setting up an organization at all. And we were thinking about just kind of, take the idea to like Flex Art, to Catalyst Arts, but then we realized that it was going to affect our budget. And so then we couldn't do that. And so we had to end up setting up our own organization, but that wasn't the actual intention. Like, it was only just to do an exchange with Poland, so.
Yeah, absolutely. But I mean, the thing about, I think, about Bbeyond is that sort of over the years, it has developed quite a distinct aesthetic, if you like, and a way of doing things. I mean, it's like when I look at the documentation of, say, the kind of the Performance Monthly kind of performances, then there's something quite distinct and unifying, about that throughout. How did this come together? I mean, was there any kind of like sort of master plan, some grand scheme? Let's revolutionize performance art, and let's kind of like Fluxus or like Dada or like or how did that side of it evolve?
It kind of happened quite organically, really. It didn't there wasn't no. I mean, where the master plan, if you want to kind of call it a master plan, it came from Boris Nilssoni's workshop, and it was in 2007 and end of February, and then at the beginning of March we did this kind of group thing together at the end of the workshop. This was the first time that all these people worked together, like, so he was kind of bringing, and we had like even Dandy the horse, somebody had a horse in it, like, out there, and so it was kind of really, and I loved this thing because it was in Custom House Square, and we were performing, and the next thing somebody came marching out of this kind of office of Laganside, and somebody directed them to me, and I was in the middle of the performance, like, and they said to me, "Hey, did you get permission to have this space?" I go, "What permission?" I said, "Geez, I thought there's a public space." And she said, "No, this is Laganside kind of things." Oh God! I said, "Well," I said, pointed to what he called the skateboarder. I said, "Did they ask you for permission?" Like, And I said, "Look, we've got public liability insurance, and we'll kind of clean up." She said, "What about that guy there?" And she pointed to Alistair, and he was kind of like letting out these kind of like insoles from the kind of the shoes, like it was like paper insoles cut out, like these white soles, like kind of there, and they were just fluttering in the kind of the March wind. And I said, "Look, don't worry." So we'll leave it as we found it, like, And then I was like there, and I was looking, and then across the way from me, it's facing me, and I didn't actually notice this before. I saw these four big flags. They were huge flags, like, and it says, and I said, "Are they your flags?" Because I said Laganside on it. She says, "Oh yeah, they're our flags." She was very proud of this, like, And I says, "Well, we're just doing what it says on your flag." And I said, "Yeah, it says making Belfast your own." I said, "That's what we're just doing." And so she just ran away. For me, it was great,
Excellent. So this was really kind of quite a sort of a playful and kind of explorative kind of way in, and evolving quite organically. But sort of like in your own kind of sort of self-portrait, like on the kind of Bbeyond website, you're talking about this dual objective of the actual and the liminal, as a kind of a real thing at Bbeyond. Can you elaborate a little bit what you mean by that?
Well, in plain terms, like, it's the physical and the mental. It's where they come together. I mean, this kind of this liminal thing is this sort of like zone in between. And I think for me, it's like venturing, or performance art is like this kind of, you leave Cronus time and you kind of go into kind of Kairos time. And this kind of, like a Greek term for opportune, it's an opportune time. So it's like, when is the opportune time? The opportune time is every time, like, out there. Like, but I mean, we don't live in that mode all the time. So for me, it's just to sort of, it's to try about being in the present. And that's why I find performance art so good. I mean, it's this opportunity. It's an opportunity to be in the poetic presence, like, out there. And so that for me is kind of, what I would see is the connection between those two, like, out there, I mean, when I was kind of thinking about kind of Bbeyond, I was also thinking about, the way of working too as well is in this thing before the kind of the group performances came in. Like, there was the solo kind of work, and then there was the group work, and the kind of that Boris then kind of introduced us to, and then it was after Boris's meeting that time that Custom House Square that we were talking to him afterwards, and we said, like, well, what best should we do? And Alistair was there, and so we said, you know, it was to keep doing it on a regular basis because everybody kind of enjoyed it. So then we started doing it. Then, you know, like it wasn't until the summer solstice 2008 we started doing it then, and we've been doing it ever since. Like, so we've done like almost over 200. Well, we've done over 200 of them now. Like by the calendar year, it wouldn't be, it'd be only about 192 or something like that. But you know, because we've gone away to different places and people would ask us to do, so we would, you know, so there's about over 200 of them done. Like, you know, so and that kind of does something to you. I mean, it's kind of this drip effect. Like, you know, it's something subtle. Like, I mean, before, you know, I'd be thinking about when they go to do performances, in a sense, trying to control it. And then I realized you don't have to try to control the thing at all. Like, you know, and it's just let it be, you know, and let yourself be. And, you know, and that's the greatest freedom. Like, you know, there is, like, you know, just sort of being there, like, you know, and with others, in the presence of others. And so for me, it's kind of, it really is a poetic kind of,
there's a big difference between sort of like a group performance and a solo performance. And a lot of performance artists pride themselves to be solo performers. I mean, group performance in performance art is not the norm, isn't it? I mean, it's so but you have very much focused on group performances with Bbeyond. And it's quite distinct, quite separate from solo performances. And some people are good at one and not good at the other. What do you see? What are the kind of what's the difference from a performance art point of view between the two?
Well, one is about kind of trying to give up the ego. I mean, if you want to put it in a nutshell, I think that you know, I mean, we all have to kind of work from. I mean, you can't get a group without an individual, and so this is kind of very interesting dynamic that you have kind of going between this kind of individual and a group, like, you know. So like, I mean, if the individual's working on themselves, like, you know, so you know, doing kind of like some kind of work towards that, like, you know, then they can grow and develop in that, you know, and then they're more prepared. And I think, you know, where some people are just doing solo performances, they just do it kind of like, you know, maybe a couple a year that could be, like, you know, and but whereas like in the sense of kind of doing the group performances, there you have opportunity to do a lot more. And so for me, that allows you more flexibility, more interaction, more time. You know, so
I mean, it's interesting, the kind of the group dynamics of group performance. For me, there's kind of two aspects to it. There's a sort of almost, I wouldn't say hierarchy, but there's a sort of maybe a hierarchy of complexity, if that's the right word. So like in a group performance context, you get situations almost like a dialogue where two people engage with each other. But that's not quite the same as a whole group coming together, is it?
Yeah. No, that's true. I mean, and it's a bit like life. It's a bit like life. And it's like you kind of walk out your front door, you don't know what you're going to meet and who you're going to meet. And, you know, that's basically, so for me, the group performance is more like life itself, you know, kind of there. And that's what makes it very interesting and, you know, and so you don't have to kind of plan too much. I mean, in a sense, if you've done your kind of like your own solo work or your own kind of work on yourself, like, you know, then you're kind of more, you know, conditioned to kind of like, or better able to face it, like, you know, kind of there. So I think that it's just being open to yourself and being open to others and allowing others to be open as well. So it's this kind of, it's a very open thing, like, you know, for me. I mean, you know, I was just reading something about Karen Brad, like, you know, kind of there, and she had said something, and I thought, oh my God, that's kind of it very much kind of encompasses what performance multi is about this being, about this open, about this intra-actions. She called them intra-actions, like, you know, they're from within, like, you know, and then there's also interactions. So there's without and within, meeting one another. And if it is there's a mutual trust. And so if that happens, like, you know, then there's, you know, something emerges out of it that was not planned by any one of the people. And so this thing, and so when the artists see that, then the people on the you know, looking at it, like, you know, they also experience that as well, like, you know, so
Yeah, I mean, the thing about, of course, the way you work, I believe, is, I mean, there is a big sort of element of improvisation and of, you know, doing things, if you like, in the here and now. But of course, people do prepare for their performance. They bring stuff along. They have a program in mind. They have an agenda in some ways. So if you were to think about this, you know, to what extent, you know, like, would you try to maintain that agenda, and to what extent would that just be a launching pad?
No, well, no, it's kind of, because it's open, people can bring whatever they want, and it's kind of, and so but I kind of noticed of recent, like, what's happening to me is that, now I kind of I just bring the bag that was from the last one, and to just gather up the stuff, to clear up the stuff and go, and then I just go down. And then sometimes I don't even open the bag. Sometimes then something either handed to you or I find something, and then that starts off the performance. And it's kind of once you go into that space, it's kind of interesting. Yeah. Once you go into that space, there's never much a tendency to come out of it. You just stay in for that time. But one thing leads on to another, like as if it was just all meant to be, like out there. And so for me, it opens up, myself, so that, and I open, it opens me and I open it, like, so there's this kind of dance going on between the kind of, like it's like a bit like dancing in a way, like, you're gonna go nowhere, you're gonna go, but it's the experience of it, so there's this,
Absolutely. I mean, when people regularly perform together, they get to know each other, don't they? They get a sort of a sense of the kind of the way they would behave in performance.
Yeah.
Do you find there's a kind of a group learning going on as well, a group development? And how important is that? Let me put this way: to what extent kind of would people that come new, trying to group newly, would they kind of fuse into, or what's the dynamic here between the kind of the hardcore and the people that kind of dip in and out?
No, it depends on where the individual is. It depends on what work the individual has done. I mean, just recently, and a person just joined us, like, at the last one or two performances, never had come before. But because she was kind of involved in dance and yoga, like that there, she just fitted in there as if, and it was just like a duck to water. And she could have been just there, like, seasoned, because she was doing some discipline work herself. So she could sort of see that. So, it's kind of, when somebody has been doing their own work themselves, then they relate to it. And the ones I see kind of the most that would most respond to it is children. They go, oh, and like mommy and daddy are holding their hand, and they kind of want to go in there, like, and then the parents are saying, oh no, look, there's a skinhead, like, kind of there, oh no. So it's, but I think children, I mean, like, oh no, I got a really good story with what he called, I remember one time with James King, and I was in Derry, and we were doing, and I remember, earlier on in the thing, that I remember seeing this woman just kind of walking with the dog, and it's just out of the corner of my eye. And I was aware that she stood and either must have been looking at us, I can't remember what I was doing, because I was just getting on with it. And basically, then I was aware that she came back again, and then she was, and then she went, she stopped again, and then she went and she got into her car, because there was a car park space around there. And basically, then I was aware of her then, because I was coming back behind James, because there was only the two of us there, and we were in Society Street making this performance. And basically, she had the door of her car open, like, and she had the camera pointed out, and she was pointing at us, like, But that didn't fascinate me at all. What actually fascinated me was because she put the dog in the back seat, and the dog was looking out the back seat, and the dog was looking at us and was going, oh my God, like, the dog is looking. I mean, what's happening here? So for me, it was like, that was fascinating.
Yeah. I mean, if you take painting, there you can basically think in terms of skill set. The kind of skills you need to have as a painter, like sort of like eye-hand coordination, and and there's certain things that you would do, like life drawing and other stuff, to almost like a practice. When you're talking performance, how would you describe the skill set of a performance artist?
That's a very good question. That's life itself. That is life itself. And I mean, it was something that kind of, Alistair had said to me one time earlier, when I was a student, and he said this to me, like, and this is like in the late 80s, like, there, and he said, oh, you should do meditation. Of course, I never listened to him, like, get out there. It was only afterwards that I sort of like, when I sort of left Catalyst, and I was kind of looking for a kind of direction where to kind of go. And then I came into kind of meditation. So, I kind of realized that, that for me, you do some discipline, like the dancer was doing some discipline, like you're doing some discipline that's just done every day, that becomes kind of like, that becomes your kind of like learning thing, or your measure, kind of thing and so, or like yoga, or it can be whatever, like, but it's kind of, it's something that's done every day. So literally you're doing a performance every day. So, and that's kind of like as your foundation, really. So that's a kind of, you're working on yourself, so.
Yeah, I mean, in other art forms, like say in music, but also
Yeah,
in painting, sculpture, you would have you would role models. So you'd be looking at, like you'd be looking at paintings or sculptures,
yeah,
and it would mean something to you, and you'd learn from that, be part of your
yeah,
development, and
yeah, yeah,
possibly part of,
yeah,
part of a school that you kind of feel drawn to, or part of a
yeah,
tradition.
yeah, yeah,
In performance, of course, you have that with solo performance as well, because you've got distinctive performers who do stuff, and you can relate to that, and you can say, oh, I want to perform like this, or I like that aspect or that aspect. With group performance, that's a kind of a bit more difficult and a bit more complex, isn't it? So
yeah.
in terms of having those kinds of points of reference, as a kind of a way of developing yourself, how does that work in group performance? In other words, I mean, how do you? I mean, there's other kind of groups like say Black Market,
Yeah,
or
yeah, yeah,
but A, there are not that many of them,
yeah,
and B, of course, it's much harder to say, oh, because an
yeah,
individual can't try to be like a group. Only a group can
yeah,
try to. So it's
yeah.
always this one versus the group. And so when you're trying to develop as a
Yeah.
performance artist doing group performance, how do you, how do you? What are your points of reference there?
Well, oh, that's a very good question. You're basically yourself. Like, I mean, I think it's trust. It's trust in yourself and trust with others. It's a very sort of like, and just being there in the space, fully present. I mean, what actually happens is that when you're not fully there, then it's kind of all over the place. And I think that in a way, for me, it's kind of, in performance or all performance, whether it's a solo or whatever, like to be fully present is the kind of thing, like, so that fully presence allows the world to open to you a bit more and you to open to it, like, and so in that opening, something that's where the magic is happening. So,
And of course, and you can see that, observe that in other group performances. So
yeah,
you can see how other people, as it were, kind of act or perform within a group context, and
yeah,
that can be quite inspiring, and that can be something that can be motivating. So, but it's interesting because it's, I guess, like group performance in that sense, or at least how I understand Bbeyond, is really totally immaterial. It's not about the stuff. It's not about things. It really is about a state of mind. It's about a
yeah.
way of being, isn't that right?
Yeah, yeah. For me, it is a way of being. Yeah, it is a way of being, but it's also a way of becoming, like out there. And so it's that becoming is also opening. So it's about being and becoming. In a nutshell, I mean, that's what performance art is kind of, in a sense, that philosophical thing, being and becoming, like, out there. So, yeah.
Which were, who were the key influences, when it comes to, I mean, obviously one name that we've already mentioned quite a few times is Alistair McLennan.
Yeah,
And of course, he still is very prominent within Bbeyond.
yeah,
He's both a
yeah,
great supporter of Bbeyond, and he's one of the kind of
yeah.
he's a great performance artist. So, what were the kind of the main influences on Bbeyond and on your own development, of course, as well? And how do you relate that to the work Bbeyond does? In
Um,
other words, what was the kind of a thing that these people brought to Bbeyond?
Well, I have to kind of go back to the very first time I saw performance art, and that was a kind of a seeing and Richard Martel, because basically in a way, in a sense, this guy was doing performance with an ox tongue, and it was just the kind of, because I'm coming from painting, and I kind of said like an ox tongue, and then there's another guy, Thomas Ruler, was making performance with what he called with chemicals, like, with potassium permanganate and whatever peroxide, like that. There was because. And so, because I was a lab technician, so it was this sort of thing that kind of drew me. It was actual materials that kind of drew me, and then what they did with them. But it wasn't that. It was more. It was their sense of freedom about just being, like, And I thought, wow, I didn't know what it was at the time, and it wasn't until that, time I had done some installations, and then I'd realized, oh, look, what's missing here, And then it was, hey, it's yourself, matey. And you're going, oh, wait a minute now, So that's what kind of brought me into performance. But so what I would say in a way, like kind of, like Richard Martel kind of like in a way opened the door. But then I see like people like Alistair and Boris and James King, like they opened the window. Because then,
okay. Talk a little bit about those doors and windows.
Yeah.
What kind of qualities or what you see in these people and why these things matter.
Well, I mean, the door was kind of literally physically the door to physically go in, but it still took me a long time to go in. I didn't go straight in. I mean, I remember doing a performance like in 1998 or something. Yeah. And basically it went down like a lead balloon and catalyst like out there, and so that put me off, performances a bit, like, and it wasn't, and I thought I'd never let that happen to anyone else again. So that was another reason for forming Bbeyond, like, but then, people like Alistair, like, again, he was coming from the Zen thing, like from doing, and also because he kept doing it. Like in the problem, I'm only realizing what he did now when I'm just doing this research, and basically because he was doing before even there was the term. I mean, performance art came in like in around about the mid-70s. That term actually came in from. So what in a sense you can be doing if you don't have a name for it. That's very kind of a brave thing to be, advancing out into, like, but I mean, they would have had the kind of the Fluxus and whatever, all that kind of thing as an inspirational thing. But Alistair kind of put up with an awful lot of stick, too, as well, like, here in kind of in Belfast. And it was just that doggedness, like, to keep going, like, because he knew there was something in it. I mean, and that has given us, a big platform. And like, now we can say, oh, we're going out to do performance art or whatever, like, but it's kind of, very early on, like when you don't have a term for it or anything like that. But then because he had Zen and he was doing a meditation, like, out there, so then he had a kind of a grounding, literally. So he had a ground, and so that's what kind of basically holds you up. That sort of like that philosophical thing. And then Boris Nilsoni, like, like again with the group stuff, he had, with Black Market, that was very inspirational, like seeing, the group work of like Black Market, and realizing, the thing about the difference, the main obvious difference in between a kind of a solo and a kind of thing. The solo is very much like it focuses on an individual, whereas like in a group, now you're dispersed. Where do you actually look, So there's not so much a focus on any one, and for me, I'm kind of more interested, in that kind of that group dynamic, because also in the sense that what the witness or the person looking on brings to it as well, because they make you do things in another way. Like when you're not aware, when there's no one there, like, you're kind of going to lift the glass in a different way. But when you see, when there's somebody said there, then you're going to lift the glass in another way. It's not, and that changes it. So, for me, there's also this thing: who's making the performance here? And where does the limits like begin and end? And that's the whole fascinating thing for me, because it becomes kind of something like, wow, this is just being alive in the world and just being going, oh, what's going on? It's just for me, it's just like I feel like a kid in a sweet shop, like, sometimes, so.
No, absolutely. Now, so let's kind of go back to some of the kind of the nitty-gritty stuff. When you were sort of setting up Bbeyond in 2001, what were the sort of the main challenges you kind of face, not just in terms of raising funding, but also in terms of sort of cultural preconceptions and everything, really, the whole, kind of trying to create a new space for something that didn't have a space within the cultural landscape of Northern Ireland in that kind of way before? What were the kind of the main challenges and hurdles that you kind of had to overcome?
Yeah, well, when you just mentioned there, creating a space, because we had as not so much kind of create a space, we had to open a space for ourselves. And because we didn't have a space, we didn't have a kind of a venue or anything like that there to do it. And so, like, I mean, the very first one that was done was like in a marketplace. And so that kind of then, kind of informed us, like, you didn't have to go and invite an art audience, like, because getting an art audience across the door is another hard problem, like, there, whereas like there was an already made audience at a marketplace. So, just go there. And so, your audience figures was the total of the kind of the marketplace. So that was kind of, that fascinated me, like, just, to be part in real life, like, and not to be in a venue, like, or separated off, like, and the way people see, like, the art, sometimes they all think is a very highfalutin kind of stuff, like, rather than it can be fun and playful and whatever, so, but the challenge is, yeah, well, against kind of other than funding, like, yeah, well, and then there's just the kind of the ones like getting accommodation for people. I mean, because the Arts Council and people, they're great to kind of pay for things, but and I appreciate that now, like, they'll pay for kind of artist fees, but they don't like paying for airfares and what they call. So it's like, that kind of thing, and hotel bills.
It's interesting when like in most other art forms, the powers to be, the kind of the funders of the arts, they tend to have a clear idea of, like of what's good and what isn't. And some of it has to do with sort of cultural relevance, to do with topicality, but some of it has to do with just skill. I mean, take a pianist, if he's really an amazing, it's very clear that he hopefully gets some funding to develop his talent. Take a painter like a Gerhard Richter. He can paint photographically and he can do other stuff too. Even with a guy like Joseph Beuys, when people were kind of not quite sure what these performances were about, there was always this kind of, oh, but he can also draw. So there was also, yes, and he does have a skill too. When you sort of set up Bbeyond and the way you're approaching this, the whole skills issue, of course, is quite a difficult one to sell to an arts council, for example. What was your kind of engagement with funding bodies and with cultural institutions in terms of this is art and this is important and we're good enough to deserve some funding? What was the kind of the dialogue there?
That took a long time. Yeah, that took a long time. And they come to kind of appreciate it more, really, what we're doing. And I think it's just, well, again, that's just to do with time. That's an invisible factor that's in the thing, like, so but at the early on there was a skepticism like about what this is like, or we could set the place on fire or burn it down or do whatever, like, kind of there. So there's always that thing, seeing the performance artist was this radical person or whatever that would kind of like really just rupture the space completely, like, kind of there, and kind of cause all the havoc.
And of course these people did exist. I mean,
yeah. And that did happen, like in places like there too as well. But I mean, and that's all they hear. You only ever hear the bad, stuff, like, rather than But I mean, the cultural things that we were kind of early on. I remember we had stuff in the marketplace the very first time, and then we wanted to try to bring when the Japanese came, we wanted to for them to do something in the marketplace, and the manager guy wouldn't let us. One of the manager guys wouldn't let us, and the other manager guy was saying to me, he says, "Well, Brian, why can't you convince him?" Like, and I said, "Well, that can be your job, like, kind of there, to get, because he wanted it, and so one wanted and the other one didn't, like, and like, I mean, one of the things was this a Japanese woman in traditional dress making the tea ceremony. I mean, like, there was no radical thing, but because in a sense, the guy couldn't explain it, what it was, because most of all the other traders were asking, "Hey, whatever his name was, what's going on?" Like, and because he couldn't explain it, he just didn't want it, like, so he just didn't, that was so it was, getting into other venues was a bit of a problem, like, or the marketplace, in particular.
I mean, it's totally, people who don't know how much work goes into, kind of developing an organization or even just a project, they totally sort of underestimate the time commitment that's required for this. And especially in the beginning, in the early stages, when you still have to, figure it out, when you basically do everything for the first time. And so how did you sort of, what were the sort of the trade-offs between kind of pushing Bbeyond as an organization and developing your own performance and your own art? I mean, was that, did your own work take a back seat, or did you find a way of combining the two?
Yeah, no, my own work took a back seat. I mean, Bbeyond become kind of like a project for me in a sense. And it was just kind of push, to kind of more push that. No, I did do, I got invitations to kind of do performances, and that was kind of great too as well. Like, but it was more to try to get Bbeyond kind of off the ground, and really it was more that commitment to kind of put in, because it was more the commitment to kind of get the group thing together. I mean, people could understand the kind of the solo things, but it was the group things. Even some of the artists, like, have problems with, like, because they're not number one on the bill, like, because there's a group of people, like, out there, so it's very hard to kind of find. Yeah, so there's that.
Absolutely. I mean, if you think back, which one or two projects were the sort of the really kind of got Bbeyond going?
Well, I mean, that very first one, that was a good catalyst, and then there was a quiet kind of time, and then the next one was, there was two projects the next year in the 2005, and that was in place of passing, which we took this kind of project. We took a bus tour of people from Belfast to Derry to the North Antrim Coast, Muslin Temple, Giant's Causeway, Dunluce Castle, Rathlin Island, and then back. So they did performances on all these different locations. So that was a very interesting kind of like model to kind of put. It was kind of Brian Conley come up with that idea, like, to kind of to do, and so this was a very good way. And so we got to travel with them, and then basically we're staying with them. So it was this sort of like extended residency, like, so that was a very good project, a very, very strong project, like, and because you got time to spend with the artists and seeing all the different kind of contexts. And then the other one that really was a cement one for me was the time with the Seiji Shimoda, one of them came, the Japanese, and they made this project in 2005, and it was, because I had asked artists then, local artists, to make some, and so there were a lot of people were really willing to kind of perform. So that for me was the kind of a very strong project, to kind of that there was that interest that was there. And so, then I felt committed to kind of work towards that interest to help, to kind of, well, how do we promote this further? Like, so that was the one for me. Like, it was, the Open Relations 2. There was actually one Open Relations 1 in 2004, the year before that, but the Open Relations 2 was the really big one for me.
And of course, I mean, the one project, if we can call it that, that kind of gave it continuity are the kind of the Performance Monthly, or the kind of monthly performance meetings. How did they, I mean, you mentioned already when they started, and was it 2007, 2008?
2008.
Yeah, but how did that evolve over time? I mean, because as you said, you're still doing it today, and and if you look back over those years, how has that evolved? How has that changed?
Well, I can only speak for myself then, kind of this here, because I can't speak for everyone else, like, but I mean, for me, I kind of was kind of going to it, and I was trying to figure out before what I was going to do. And like now I just go and just there's no figuring out. There's just kind of, I'm just meeting people, really meeting people, and just being there, being present and whatever, rather than setting out the kind of say, okay, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, and then I'm going to move over there, and I'm going to do whatever, but so that you're trying to figure out, like, in a solo, in a way, what you're trying to do in a solo performance, because in a way you have to kind of put some, when you're doing a solo performance, I haven't got to the stage yet where I just kind of rock up like with nothing in the bag or whatever, and then just make it up. Whereas you try to put confinements or frame on it, like, framing it like some way, and then and then work with it, and then now you try to leave open parts where you can just explore, and people know that, hey, you're exploring kind of stuff, like, whereas like the Performance Monthly is much more about exploring all the time, so it's just really open, so and it depends on like who you meet, and it's like a kind of really like a big dance thing, like,
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, when you look back, I mean, over that period, what is it, like 15, 16, 17 years of, well, actually,
2008 or whatever now, whatever, I can't even do the sum.
But when you look back at those years, I mean, of course, the kind of the political and the cultural landscape of Belfast has changed quite significantly. In many ways, in others it probably hasn't, but there have been sort of societal and cultural and political changes over that period. And do you find that is reflected in those performances, or is that kind of separate?
Well, actually, that is a good question. I think that when we started off doing it, there was another thing, because artists are so diverse. And basically, it's a bit like our politicians. They're so diverse. They were so diverse, they actually couldn't work together. And so I thought, well, hold on a second. Artists are supposed to be part of the intelligentsia. If they can't kind of get us together to work together, how in the name of God can we expect our politicians to kind of have to do that? Like, So I think that, it was that onus on the artist to kind of step up to the plate, literally, like, and show us, kind of there, So that was one of the things behind it for me, like, there was that artists could be, kind of like, more like leaders, like, in a sense of kind of, being kind of ambassadors, like, for their, what do you call it, for their places, like, so it was, the politicians, like, I mean, so I mean, things don't change that much, like, there's still that sort of because again, it comes down to trust. People don't trust. And again, it's just, and it's really all about trust. It's about trusting yourself, and if you generally, if you can't trust others because you don't trust yourself. But if you trust yourself, then that boundary between yourself and the other it kind of opens up. You see more the other person, like, more like, that not as an adversary or whatever there, as a kind of, as a friend or a colleague or whatever, so it's, you're in this together,
Absolutely. I mean, what I find quite fascinating about Bbeyond is the sort of the two elements that for me kind of define it. On the one hand, it's the sort of, the Performance Monthly meetings, which is the way I kind of sort of understand it's a kind of a very open space where people come together.
Yeah.
But it's in some ways super hyper local. It's always kind of quite site specific. And I believe you are picking specific sites for each Performance Monthly event. On the other hand, you have your international exchanges, which is kind of reaching out, isn't it? So to have the kind of Performance Monthlies that are the sort of hyper local, and then to have the kind of international and often global exchanges, it's a sort of like a breathing in and a breathing out, isn't it? It's like two sides of that coin. Now, can you talk a little bit about the importance of international exchanges and how that has shaped the development of Bbeyond?
Oh, well, that was kind of what Bbeyond kind of set up at the start to do, was like an international exchange. But then, exchanges where, again, this come back down to funding. That was become a big problem with, hotel rooms and accommodation and flights and blah and all that kind of stuff. So it was like, so then we just started off as kind of with just doing projects, inviting people. And so it wasn't kind of like done as an exchange, because within exchange, then there's a commitment on the other host then to kind of also do part of the thing. So there was, it was too much of a commitment. But we have done some exchanges, really good ones, so and that was kind of really the main focus for kind of Bbeyond. Like, it was like to do exchanges and one of the very first ones that we did was like with Quebec, and again, I think that just kind of goes back to kind of Richard Martel, and that was like in 2006, kind of there. So that was and that was, and I mean, when myself and Magusha had, decided to set up Bbeyond, we were talking about doing this Polish one, but that Polish one didn't happen until 2008, in actuality then, because again, it was just getting things set. Again, it was all just funding things to line up, but exchanges are because it's also the culture shock of just being away. And I think that is kind of, when you come back, you see your own place in a different way. So, you become a bit more awake to the world or more present, so that was, so I think that people need exchanges, and they need culture shock, kind of there and that kind of.
Yeah, totally. I mean, one aspect of what Bbeyond does, I thought always was quite, and in fact, I thought was very, very, very interesting. I had, as you know very well, I had the privilege of being invited once myself to do the silent lecture with Bbeyond, and I was put up with basically members of Bbeyond to they hosted me, they cooked for me, they provided me with a place to sleep. And that hospitality and the kind of incidental conversations that take place in that context, that I personally felt that this was probably more important and more interesting to me than the actual project that I was there to do. And I think this is sort of a totally undervalued and underreported aspect of what Bbeyond does. Can you talk a little bit about that side, that philosophy of hosting? Because I think that is such an important, and it's also quite ambassadorial.
No, I think, yes, what you said there is very, very important. Is really is that in between, that's where you get to kind of share time about cooking and kind of sharing a meal together, and that's very, very important. And because that's kind of part of life itself. And I think that's where it becomes, it's not this, art form, because I mean, as you kind of said, like performance art is such a kind of interdisciplinary kind of art form. What is it like? I mean, like I love asking people the question, well, or performance artists, well, what's performance art the art of? Kind of there, to their annoyance, but anyway, it's just sharing time, and you just see how other people live, and you kind of appreciate, you appreciate more than yourself. And I mean, that time, because I got the chance then to go to what he called Quebec, and it was like, staying with kind of Richard Martel, and that was kind of very interesting. I mean, he was very, he was just kind of like a live wire, in a sense. And for me, it's something in that, at the very first time I saw performance, kind of went in, like literally jumped into your soul or something like that there. And you kind of go, what is this like? That was like, it's been trying to get out then ever since, but, so.
Absolutely. But I mean, obviously you have been now with, obviously you're kind of, in my way of looking at it, you really are the kind of the godfather of Bbeyond in a way. I mean, a lot of people have come and gone, but Brian is still very much, there, last man standing. No, not last man standing, because of course it's a vibrant organization, but you have been there through thick and thin. And what, sort of the last thing I'd really like to talk about is how that experience over the last, 20 odd years has shaped your own outlook and performance and your own practice.
How has that shaped me? Well, for me, I mean, I was a really shy person, absolutely, totally shy. I was too scared. I was to kind of to go into this kind of performance art. I was going, oh my God, this is kind of, you really want to be mad in the head, like, to do this stuff, like, And so, in a way, for me, it has opened me up to be myself. I mean, what I like to kind of say to people is that, be beyond yourself. And that is like, get yourself out of the way of yourself so you can actually be yourself. I mean, be your real self, which is this open, really trusting, loving, giving person like that there. And everybody has that, like, but it's kind of what life does to them in the way, like, it kind of makes them kind of like, retracted, kind of, closed, and kind of like, and so, and I think that life's too short for what he called, I think for me, that's why I just enjoy doing performance like that there. So, and the people I've met and the people that share the time with, like, it's great. It's absolutely, and I fully appreciate that. It's like, it's when you try to do that in your real life as well. I mean, it's not just when you're just doing performances. So for me, it's, it's beginning now to kind of seep out into my real life as well. Like, so that's what it is kind of most appreciative of, like, for me, that's, probably the greatest lesson, but that takes time, and time is another factor. Time is a very important factor in this whole thing. It's an invisible, like, element that's going on there, but it's this sort of like, and I kind of learned that from Alistair, like this drip effect, that does make a big change, like, so, and it does change you, like, so,
yeah. No, absolutely. Now, when people get involved in group work, I mean, this is a total generalization, and not everybody kind of like follows that trajectory, but it's like a pendulum. It's like you kind of go with quite a lot of idealism because you think working collaboratively and as a group is brilliant. And then you go in and you see how egos kind of really kind of get in the way, and how exhausting it can be, and how disappointing and disillusioning and all the rest. And what remains at the end of that process is kind of essentially going to decide whether you're going to stick with it or not. But there's enough substance beyond the kind of the aggro that you have to go through to stick with it. But then, of course, there is often a kind of a group that kind of manages to move beyond that, and to develop a kind of a practice, a group practice, which is, kind of beyond that ego. So in terms of actually the way you have developed your own practice as a performer, how has that evolved for you? How has that developed for you?
Well, it's made me a better person. I think a more tolerant person, like, of others and things like that. I mean, I mean, like, I like that sort of, I seen a quote by Victor Turner: "By their performances shall you know them," and that's so true. Like, it is really true. Like, true. And I think that, when you're talking about kind of group performance, like, the ego kind of exhausts things, and it kind of exhausts you as well, and it's kind of. And so, we've had the opportunity of working very long durational things as well. I remember James King proposed this one, and we did this one alongside, we were doing performance monthlies as well. It was this kind of accumulator one. And it was like, the first month was 1 hour, January, 1 hour, February, 2 hours, 2 artists. And then it went up to, December, 12 hours, 12 artists, so you could sort of see that when, people got exhausted. I remember, people get exhausted. They can come out of themselves a bit more, like, out there. But it's also this sort of thing is, another thing I noticed about it is that it gives you energy, because you're not it's not me doing it. It's like, I did it my way, that kind of Frank Sinatra song, or, this sort of thing, this, because the ego trying to claim and hold on, and that's a very hard thing to do. Whereas, like, when you're just more open and free, then it's, that energy carries you along, like, so.
No, absolutely. I mean, there's a time and a place for everything. And, sort of a cynic could say, of course, it's not the case in with Bbeyond, but the cynic could say, well, the time of performance art kind of is passing. It's sort of we're moving on. do you feel you have kind of created with Bbeyond something kind of quasi-permanent, something that'll stay and evolve? And if so, where do you see where do you see it go? And what do you sort of see as the main challenges, the big things that performance art will have to confront in the next years?
Well, I see it kind of more so now becoming part of the institution, like, out there. And I think that the institutions are, trying to own kind of like performance in the sense that in its kind of purity, where it's kind of coming from. Like, you can't own something. I mean, this is where it's just kind of outside of the market place for it. And this is kind of a problem, like, you can have documentation or whatever, but it's not the performance. And in the way that they're trying to, you just see kind of recent publications and they talk about performance in contemporary art, not performance art. So performance art's kind of been, and so for me, I see that performance art is a kind of, is especially now in the case of all the kind of in the after the COVID, and there's a lot more mental kind of like people kind of, there's more less and less toleration of people, like, and there's kind of just, and I don't know whether it's the COVID had, it was acted as a catalyst for that or whatever, but there just seems to be a lot more. And I think that, in that sense, performance art can help, like, kind of there, for me. And I think it's that, and it can help, it can help everybody. I mean, it's not just, it's not just, it's not just myself. I mean, I think it's kind of, but you have to be willing to kind of go with it. Like, you have to be willing to, and I mean, that was the kind of thing that stopped me from going into performance art in the first place, was this sort of thing. You can't make an idiot of yourself knowingly. You cannot. It's impossible. It's against the human nature. But everybody's doing it, like, in it there. Yeah, so, but consciously you can't do it, unconsciously everybody's doing it, like, in that there. So I mean, so in a way it's overcoming that barrier, within yourself, which is yourself, and it's only yourself that's holding you back. For me, I think that and it's the way we see the world. I mean, like, and it's what, yeah, and that mental construct, I mean, I'm fascinated by the idea that, especially in a group performance, you could have like 10 people or whatever, they're doing performance, but then there's these 10 different worlds, but these 10 different worlds start to merge, especially when people work together. And then they become like 5 different, or if there's groups of 2 working together or whatever, like, but they start to kind of become smaller, like, in a sense. So in a way, that's what the group performance is kind of helping towards, because then, especially if they drop the ego, then they're working towards one thing, like, kind of there, and they don't know what it is, but it's kind of, it informs them as it emerges themselves, like, and they interact with it. So that's kind of,
I think that's a really good place to stop, Brian. Now, just finally, are there any kind of books or any you would like to recommend? Any reading that you think that would kind of be pertinent, that would kind of, in some ways, kind of give people away? And or is there any events or exhibitions, performances that you would like to just mention at this point?
A book I would kind of like recommend at the moment is Karen Barad, like, Meeting the Universe Halfway. Now, that's a kind of very she's a feminist, philosophical kind of thing, and also a physicist, like, there. So it's like, it deals with kind of quantum physics. I mean, so it's this definition between, I mean, which is kind of interesting. Ask me, it's like between the particle and the wave. Like, so the particle is like the individual, and the wave is like the group. Now, the dynamic is, what's happening between those two things. So, so quantum physics is a good way to kind of like, I try to explain that. This polarization, like, kind of there, this country kind of position, like, and then, when I think of it, we have John Bell from here, like, a physicist who's actually given us a theorem, in quantum physics, like, out there, and basically, Einstein only wrote a theory, like, so I would recommend that Karen Brad book. And the other thing is, that next year for us, because Alistair, you said start, and is very important, came here in 1975, so that is will be the 50th anniversary of performance art. But then I've realized that too as well, because the term only came in or started to become kind of used towards the middle of the kind of 1970s. it's performance art all over the world. It's not just here. So it's this sort of, you know, so for me, it would be like, you know, how to get how to involve that whole network that's kind of to make something together, you know, would be kind of, you know, that could be kind of done simultaneously in different places, like, you know. That would
Absolutely.
be
So just to kind of drive that point home, so if there's listeners or viewers kind of who have ideas for doing performances next year within that context, they presumably they can contact Bbeyond,
yeah.
and so, you know, become part of a greater kind of like project.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Or if they're kind of looking from different other countries, there'll be other, like in Germany is very strong. Like, I mean, Quebec, you know, Japan, China, you know, there's like a Thailand. I mean, geez, yeah. I mean, for me, one of the projects that we did was that fascinated me was the kind of the Equinox project, and that was kind of on the back of like just doing performance monthlies, and this kind of thing. This project, you know, went from New Zealand, from Dunedin in New Zealand to West Coast Canada, like, you know, so there was like something like 27 countries, over 280 artists like out there performed on one day on the Equinox, and that was a kind of yeah, that was a you know, this kind of wave of kind of performance. So it would be really nice to make a kind of connection with that again, like, you know. And then we did a symposium, which was kind of the later on. Then we did a symposium around that, and a whole lot of people came here to Belfast, and it was really good because we did this performance in the very first place that Boris took us, where we did it with Dandy the horse at Custom House Square. And really that day we did make Belfast our own, because I was telling that story, like, you know, kind of there. So it was, yeah, that was very important. Yeah. So.
Excellent, Brian. Thank you ever so much. I'm so glad that the camera in the end worked,
that
we managed to.
And that never happened before. I don't know how. In the name of God, I mean, like, oh, geez, what?
Excellent, Brian. Thank you very much. You know, keep up the good spirit, keep up the good work. And you know, let's stay in touch. And yeah, maybe, I don't know, maybe in a year's time or so, we can have another one of those dialogues and see how things have evolved. Maybe around, you know, the kind of the 50th anniversary. Be very interesting to do something then.
Yeah. Okay. Listen, Nico, all the best.
Thank you very much. All the best. Bye-bye.
Bye.